Catch all of the NFL games this season at the Albany Teletheater with the NFL Sunday Ticket from DirecTV, and enjoy the fine dining of Martell's with their special football menu, along with drink specials from Heineken. Along with the football, you can also watch and wager on all of the great fall racing at the Albany Teletheater, 711 Central Avenue. For reservations, call 438-0127.
This is the OTB Communications Network.
Now, Track Facts with Tom Amello and Nick Kling.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Track Facts on this snowy Sunday day. This snowy Sunday. I'm Tom Amello. To my far right, my good friend Nick Kling, handicapper for the record, and we are delighted to be joined by Bob Duncan, retired NYRA starter. We know you all have tons of questions that you'd like to ask Bob. We've had opportunities over the years to Saratoga and times that we've been down to New York to have many conversations with Bob, and he's always been forthcoming. So Bob, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come down from the farm.
From the farm, out of the mountains.
Out of the mountains,
yeah.
And join us today. Bob, when did you start with the NYRA? And let's give the audience a bit of information about how you got into this game.
Well, my dad was a horse trainer, so I had worked on the racetrack as a kid during school. And while in college, I had the opportunity one summer, and actually I think it was 67, it might have been 66, I had the opportunity to work on the starting gate. I was invited by Dr. Manuel Gilman to come and work on the gate, and I did it. Enjoyed it so much that I continued on, and it became a career for me.
1967 is when you started. I went on the internet and did a little Googleizing to find out what, if anything, there was about Bob Duncan. I found two names, Pat Pirelli and a name that I'm much more familiar with, Bob, Monty Roberts. These are two horsemen who have been influential in your growth in the game. Talk about both of them, please.
They made a major change in the way we do things at the starting gate. About 15 years ago, at that time I'd already been doing the job probably 15, 20 years. I knew we were having success, but not quite the success that I wanted to. There were times when we were wrestling with these horses, we were struggling to get along with them. We were getting things done, but I knew that we could be doing better. There was a certain amount of attrition. Some horses just never made it, and we would blame it on our skill level, but usually we blamed it on the horse. We'd say, well, these horses are just untrainable. About that time I started doing some investigating, and I was lucky enough to stumble upon Monty Roberts. Monty came to Saratoga one day, and he had heard that we were doing some more horse-friendly things.
Now let me interrupt. Monty Roberts, ladies and gentlemen, is the man who talks to horses, if you will.
The man who listens to
horses. The man
horses.
who listens to horses,
Yes.
excuse me. And there have been several occasions where he's been profiled on network television, and basically he will take a wild horse or a horse who's been unable to be trained, if you will, and give him a little time in the ring. He joins up with the horse, and actually, you can read his book, The Man Who Listens to Horses, and it's a wonderful story. Wonderful story. Go ahead.
It is, and Monty was just the introduction to this program. What he does is a wonderful thing, but there's a world of information out there, I found, and Pat Pirelli was the next name that I was able to find on the internet, and I reached out to his organization and was invited out to Colorado to spend some time with them. And basically what all these people do is they teach you to communicate with the horse the way horses communicate with each other. And it has to do with not a verbal or a spoken language, but with body language. And what it had enabled us to do, and other horsemen as well, is to connect to the horse in a different way, where horses were doing things willingly because you become sort of a leader to the horse, and they gain trust in your leadership.
Nick?
Well, the interesting thing about what you said at first, Bob, is that you started working at the gate and you enjoyed it and you want to keep doing it. That that kind of, brought up a question for me, which is, being a starter, assistant starter, is a very dangerous job. So how does somebody, do you just ease into it and not realize the potential dangers? Now, for example, I was a farmer before I got into this, and when I was a kid, I didn't worry about tractors tipping over and getting crushed. But then a few of our neighbors that happened to. So now you begin to understand what some of the dangers are. Explain to our audience a little bit just what the men and women that handle horses, what's required of them, what do they have to do to keep themselves and the horses and the riders safe?
Well, you're absolutely right. When you're a young man, you have a sense of invincibility and immortality, and you do this thinking, oh yeah, that's the kind of thing I want to do, because not only is it exciting and you like dealing with the horses, but you get to be part of a major sports event. So there's a lot of enticement to be involved with it. The dangers are somewhat thrilling, and your successes, you get immediate gratification sometimes when you're able to improve a horse. But yes, it is dangerous, as we all know. We've had a terrible tragedy this year at a starting gate in Finger Lakes. There are components of working around horses at the gate. When a horse arrives at the starting gate, you'll never find him at a more excitable state. He's revved to go. The gate is somewhat of an alien environment. I beg your pardon, an alien environment for the horse, because it's an enclosed area. Horses by nature want to be free. Their defense in the wild is to be able to run away. So what happens sometimes in the starting gate is you have these explosive moments when the horse is trying to get free. From what I can imagine, the incident at Finger Lakes the other day involved pushing a horse into the gate, which is something you'll frequently see us do as a last-ditch effort. I don't know that for a fact, but judging by what happened, I imagine he was kicked while pushing a horse into the gate. So injuries are commonplace. Rarely life-threatening, but we've been kicked and bitten and stepped on any number of times, and it's just part and parcel to the job.
Bob, we were talking last week in anticipation of you coming. I don't know exactly how many tracks there are in the country, but there's a limited number of tracks, so there's a limited number of gate crews, and to a certain degree, I would say that folks who work the gates are almost a brotherhood, like firefighters or you share something that nobody else really does.
That's true, and it's an interesting thing too, Tom, because you can wander from gate to gate around the country, and I do this on my vacations. I like to visit other starting gates.
Oh, let's see, what am I going to do? I think I'll go out and watch them start in Santa Anita.
Well, you do, because you learn, first of all, from other crews, and there is that bond, and usually when you go to the crews, you'll find very similar personalities on the gate crews. Well, it attracts a certain type of person.
So let me ask you this. If Nick was going to go out to Santa Anita, he'd call the press box. Who do you call?
Santa Anita? Well, right away, I'd call Jay Slender.
Okay. All right. Well, now let's try and talk a little bit about that. I think what everybody in the country kind of understands about the gate is the start at the Kentucky Derby, where it's kind of a long load and then an instant release. And yet, when you and I first had our first conversation, it was about time in the gate.
Yes.
Everywhere that I see something written about you, it's about patience and about safety, certainly. And I don't think any starter is not concerned about the safety of the animal or the athlete. But could you talk a little bit about West Coast to East Coast and really how you've developed? You started to talk about Monty and Pat Pirelli, but it's this whole notion of patience with the horses and the gate. Again, understanding from the conversation, we're batters. And there's some folks, they see the horse going into one slot and something happens out here and he's sitting in there for X amount of time as you're getting your work done, and the bettor sitting at the teletheater is getting a little nervous and it's your fault.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that you mentioned the Kentucky Derby, and I can't imagine a more high-stress situation for a starter and a gate crew. They do a marvelous job year in and year out. They have wonderful starts and nice, smooth, quick professional loads. So I mean, my hat's off to those folks down there. But here in New York, what we tried to institute was a change in philosophy about the gate. The old-time starters were under the impression that you would try to hide your intentions from the riders for fear that they would take a jump on you. They would get information beforehand and be able to take an advantage at the start. They also felt that the quicker you get it done, the less chance of the explosion in the starting gate. through these new methods that we've learned, the teaching horses this new way, we found that you give the horses a series of signals at the gate that tell him when the start is about to occur. And we found that by not giving them those signals, you're able to keep the horse calm and relaxed, and they'll stay in the gate indefinitely while you're trying to prepare for a load. So we've taken the approach that more information is better. I tried to as the starter.
Now, more information to your guys?
To my guys who and to the riders, and it winds up being to the horse as well.
Okay.
So let me ask you, Bob, how do you transmit then, or how do the assistants transmit to the horse that the start is about to occur?
It's there's a lot of verbal communication. The starter is mic'd, first of all, so so we're able to talk. And one thing I like to impress upon you too is since horses do communicate through body language, it's important when you're communicating with your crew and they're communicating with the horse to remain calm. Your body has to remain calm. So the idea is to keep it settled. You know, take the time it takes to load the field, and you'll be better off. So I inform the crew as the load is progressing as to how we're doing and what the delays are going to be. And when the last horse goes in, we say the last man that goes in, when he's prepared, his horse is locked in, he'll say to me, "You got him," and I might then say, "Get tied on,"
That's what we know about you. That's you.
Well, it's the final thing. I want everybody to know precise. I figured the more information, the better. If they know at the last minute that the start's going to occur, then everybody can cue their horse properly. It synchronizes things.
What we hear is, "No, boss, no, 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 no."
Yeah.
I mean, those are a lot of no's that you have to interpret very quickly.
Yeah.
And I guess the next question, we're talking about being up on the ladder or up on the podium and down on the ground. What kind of vision do you have from your standpoint there?
Well, first thing I'd like to tell you is you're probably better off being a blind starter than a deaf starter, because you count much more on what the information being given to you from the horseman in the gate. As far as perspective, I found that being high is fine, but you're not really seeing the most essential parts of the start. When you're low, you can, first of all, you have mobility. For my own sake, I wander in front of the gate, close to the stalls. You can look at the horse. You can kind of get an opinion as to how they're handling the load and whether they're going into what I would refer to as a meltdown. It also enables you to be a part of the process to help a horse that's in trouble in there. You're getting help to him sooner. It allows you to adjust your position farther away or closer to the gate so that you can get yourself in the best position to see the horse's feet. With the starter stand, the stand is stationary in most cases, so you're limited to where that stand's been placed in relationship to where the gate has been set. And sometimes it's 80 feet away, and sometimes it's 20 feet away. I like the flexibility of being on the ground. I think it gives me a better communication with everyone.
Let me just say something to the audience, and then you can go there. Ladies and gentlemen, shortly after the top of the hour, the 10 o'clock hour, we'll be opening up the phone lines. We'd really like to engage you, give you an opportunity to interact with Bob. He'll try his best to answer whatever questions you have from a handicapper standpoint about the start of a race. When Nick is finished, I'd like to talk a little bit about just schooling horses, in terms of age and so on. Nick?
A couple of questions that people have asked me continuously, Bob, and since you're here, this is a perfect time to explain it to the audience. One thing that happens very frequently behind the gate is that you'll see the assistants. They'll have, whether it's a leather shank or a strap, and they'll either twirl it in a windmill motion behind the horse, or occasionally you'll see them, kind of snap it at their heels. The average racing fan looks at that and says, that doesn't look like it's patient, that doesn't look like it's, they might construe it as less than humane, and yet that would seem to be at odds with the technique that you and your crew, your former crew, have taken with horses. So can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, I can. In the morning you have the luxury of time when you're schooling these horses, and hopefully you get enough foundation into the horse so that when they arrive at the races, they're prepared to load in an orderly and timely fashion. Sometimes in the afternoon you're left with going back to some of the old school methods, and that might involve pushing the horse. The windmilling of the strap, while it might look severe, rarely is the horse touched with it. It's more of a threatening gesture to get him to move away
It's a
from it.
vision kind of thing, right?
There's sound and vision.
Okay, there's sound and vision.
You can hear the motion of it.
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd like to do it in sort of an orderly progression of steps to ask the horse to move forward. If you had a half an hour, you wouldn't have to do that. But you know, you're limited. We try to fit our starts into other people's schedules. You're trying to meet a certain deadline at the gate, a post time, and sometimes you're left with probably doing it faster than you'd like to.
And the other thing, and this happened a few years ago, which, you know, to somebody that's uninitiated like myself, we actually had a viewer call and ask us about this, and you spent a lot of time on the phone explaining to me exactly, you know, why this was done. There was an assistant starter that, you know, I've forgotten what was happening with the horse, but he gave him a quick shot in a, you know, with a closed fist in a certain spot on the horse's head, and you know, I mean, I expected, you know, a cover-up, you know, why this happened. You know, he shouldn't have done it, but you explained to me why it was done, and it actually makes perfectly logical sense.
It's you know, the closed fist might be an issue, Nick, quite frankly, but there is a moment there where you can get the horse's attention and get him to stand. You'll get 2 or 3 seconds out of him by, there's a spot right on the side of his cheek where you can kind of pop it, make a cupping sound, and it makes the horse come to attention and stand quietly for a moment. It looks a lot worse than it actually is. It's certainly a lot less painful than being spanked from the 16th pole home.
So in effect, it's like, like if when I was a kid and I was unruly, my mother raised her voice, you know, and sort of picked up her hand. It's that kind of a gesture. It's to get your attention and
exactly.
say, you know, smarten up, kid.
You expect the horse to say, thanks, I needed that. But it's not painful, and it might give you that 1 second to affect the start.
Bob, I've said this on the program before, many years ago. I can't even remember how far. I was at Saratoga on the backstretch at the starting gate, and you were probably there, and Johnny Campo was there with a little the late John Campo was there with a little cigar, and I didn't know Mr. Campo at all, but I knew who he was, and I said to him, I says, Mr. Campo, what are you looking for? You know, when you bring your horses to the gate, he says, looking for, he says, they're so dumb, we're just trying to remind them what to do. And which I thought was a typical Johnny Campo response.
That's Campo.
But, yeah, that's Campo. Why don't you take us through the beginning, a horse's first time to the gate, you know, 2-year-old or 3-year-old maiden, and then older horses. Talk a little bit about that with our audience, please.
First of all, horses aren't dumb. They wouldn't be around today if they were dumb. But the process, I mean, there are a lot of people that just assume that horses automatically know how to break from the gate, and that's just not the case. I mean, horses have to be taught through a progression of steps, and we might do that by first walking the horse through a starting gate a couple of times, getting him familiar with the feel of the gate, touching against it. With our new technique, the first thing we do is to take the horse behind the gate and move him, cause movement, and that starts the connection where the horse will then respond to you. So that, for me, that's the initial thing that I do with every horse. That kind of sets the tone. It takes the fear away from the horse, and then allows him to trial a new experience that he might otherwise have considered threatening. So that might be your first day. You kind of rock him, get him moving, get him following you well, lead him into the starting gate, lead him through as often as it takes to get him comfortable with it. You never go on to the next step until he's comfortable. Over the series of maybe 10 visits to the gate, he'll go from just learning to walk through the gate to where he's actually prepared to break competitively.
Now, 10 visits to the gate. You're keeping track. You've got
we are. We have a record.
Is this computerized, or
we're trying to get.
Okay.
We have some computerization. Our afternoon marks that reflect what we need to do with the horse at race time are in a computer bank. We're trying to create we have a program that we're testing where you take laptops out, and if a horse were to arrive at the gate, we could put the trainer's name or the owner's name into it, get all the information, and then have some knowledge in our hands, which we do now, but it's all done by hand, it's all written. So what we've learned, though, is it takes probably 10 to 15 visits over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, and once again, this is all flexible. This can be adjusted to teach a horse from his first visit until he's actually prepared to race.
Okay, older horses coming back to the gate now. They've got their gate card. and you've got your either database or your book of marks, if you will, on a horse. And so if Fletcher brings a couple of his older horses for company work, you know who's coming, you know what the goods, the bads, and the ugly of them when they get to the gate.
Yeah. Truth of the matter is, working at the gate is a very traumatic spot for a horse. And for us, teaching a horse about the gate is a delicate balance between encouraging him to explode from the starting gate, but yet keeping him mentally balanced and stable. We've learned over the years that doing it through fear or chasing him or making the gate a fearful spot doesn't work. So we found that it's important to encourage trainers to bring their horses back after races to do sort of a remedial afternoon where they stand for a while, know that they can go there and have a quiet, pleasant experience. It doesn't necessarily entail breaking from the starting gate. So yes, trainers do bring these older horses back to us, and we do keep a record on them. And through various experiences at the races, be it a problem loading the horse, difficult horse in the gate, or something he may do wrong at leaving the gate, either being slow or not tracking straight, we'll ask a trainer to come back to correct these problems.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that one, Bob. One of the things that I, as a handicapper, have noticed over the years, and this may be anecdotal rather than, done on an investigatory basis, but it looks like certain trainers have horses that consistently break well, and certain trainers have horses that consistently don't. For example, Hall of Famer Wayne Lucas, when he was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when he was winning more races than he is now, his horses almost always had speed and almost always broke sharply from the gate. And on the other hand, I take a back seat to nobody in my admiration for Alan Jerkins, who I think is just the most wonderful person. But a lot of his horses tend to break slow, and I shouldn't say a lot. Some of his horses occasionally will break slowly. So is that the sort of thing that you, as a starter, and your crew have to take into account with horses when you're working with them in the morning and at race time?
It certainly is. You can press a horse in the morning. You can ask him to do more and more to where you instill that speed into the horse. But once again, you're dealing with that balance between his mental stability and his ability to break sharply from the gate. Some horses pick it up rapidly. They're more athletic and they can do it. Other trainers, and I lean this way myself, feel that let's get him a strong foundation in the morning, but keep him mentally comfortable and let him develop his skills at race time. It's a rare thing to find a first-time starter that will break as well as a horse that's raced once. That first race gives him a tremendous amount of knowledge, a tremendous amount of experience.
Do me a favor. Would you say that again, please, about first time? It's awful hard for a horse to win a race as a first-time starter.
So many distractions. It's all new. So many distractions. And it's in a horse's nature, in a case like that where there's a bit of stress and a bit of intimidation, to not be in front. They want to follow somebody. And that occurs at the gate all the time.
Geez, I had a question. Nikki brought up the issue of trainer and horse. What about jockey and horse? No, you've got the book on the horse, whether he's a good break, slow break, or whatever. Certain like the recently injured Chucky Lopez, good gait. We've got these good gait riders, and I guess I'm going to ask you occasionally, in your brain, are you going, oh my goodness, I got the wrong guy on the wrong horse? And I don't mean that in a negative sense.
No, that's true. There are people fit horses. They certainly do. But what we found is that the jockeys appreciate having the information that allows them to keep their horse relaxed. That's the key.
Let me ask you. Okay, I'm going to interrupt because I think what you're telling me now is that you guys share with the jock as much as you can about the intricacies of the horse.
Absolutely.
Okay. News to me.
Well, I'll tell you. Here's something that a young rider quite often will come to the gate with the idea in his mind that if I can keep key in this horse, if I can just, I might be able to beat this gate. And it doesn't take them long to learn. First of all, one of the riders next to them, an experienced rider, will correct him that you'll probably get in more trouble than have success with that, because you wind up sending your horse into the doors prematurely by urging him. the experienced rider, you cause the horses to flip more frequently in that case. You're asking him to do something that he's incapable of doing. The doors are closed and you're saying leave. Well, he's going to leave. It might be over the top or it might be out the back.
It's like the novice driver of a drag racer that burns his tires at the start,
exactly.
and he gets left behind.
Yes, exactly. So if you watch a Jerry Bailey or someone like that, he's in the gate, and it could be the Derby. Somebody like Jerry, who's so cool, his shoulders are dropped. He's sitting there and he's just sort of hanging out. And when things get ready, all of a sudden he does just a few simple things. And those are the cue that the horse needs. And the horse has to only stand at attention for a short time.
Now you bring up Jerry Bailey. And here we
Is this a sore spot?
No, it's not a sore spot. It's not a sore spot at all. It's just that we've statistically over the years it seems that he's much better breaking turf horses who don't need to go to the front, and occasionally, more than that, he gets left on some of these dirt horses. So I'm wondering, I'd love to have the camera on and see if he's still awake when you send the game. No, not a sore spot, but we've had over the years we've had some interaction with fans about certainly from a handicapping standpoint, you probably don't. Jerry Bailey's a man you want on your horse. From a value standpoint, he's taking too much money, and so anytime anything gets in the way of that, because we're talking about this as wagerers, Mr. Bob. You got an email.
Yeah, we want to remind our listeners out there, if you'd prefer to email us rather than call, if you've got a question for Bob, you can email the show at my email address, docfonda@telenet.net, which I'm sure our crack staff will have up on the screen. There it is.
And we're gonna go to phones right after a commercial break here. So go ahead.
We've got an email from for Bob from one of Tom and my best friends, Lee Tomlinson. Lee has a question for you, Bob. It said in France they frequently use starting gates that have no roof. The gate goes no higher than the top of a horse's head, and he suspects this configuration reduces the number of head injuries, especially when a horse rears or veers when the gate opens. Any thoughts on why they're not used here?
I'm familiar with that gate. It's actually in Ireland where that gate is used. In fact, I've spent some time in Ireland recently and I had the chance to talk about these gates. He makes a point. I mean, there is a risk of a horse hitting his head in the starting gate, but they're built pretty tall, Nick. It takes quite the vertical explosion to hit your head on the top of the gate. As far as at the start and the veering, I don't think the gate makes a difference one way or the other in that respect. A horse can veer out of that gate as well as our gates. I think we're better off with our gate. American racing is geared to speed to begin with.
Right.
Yep.
When you're gearing your horse to speed, you've got the potential for more explosions in the starting gate. These horses are like linemen on the line, and sometimes they miss the snap and they're going when they're not supposed to. We need a sturdier gate. That gate would not hold up in our racing over time. That gate is made that way, by the way, because then they're able to compress it, believe it or not, like an accordion, and then ship it from meet to meet. As you know, in Ireland and England, they have these short. No, yeah, and sometimes there's 3 meets around the country, and God knows where you're going to race that day.
Yeah, actually, what you just said, Bob, raises a question which is right out of left field, and if you don't have an opinion, that's perfectly fine. But you've been a horseman now for, I guess, at least 40 years. One of the things that we as commentators and handicappers talk about is how the thoroughbred has changed now. You mentioned the game is geared for speed. It looks like, the pedigrees are geared for speed. Horses tend to break down more often, at least they seem to, than they used to. Have you seen a difference in the thoroughbred in the years that you've been involved, and has it had any effect on the way you and assistant starters have to do their job?
Yes, I think there is a difference. I think horses are more speedy than they used to be. Because of the new methods we've been using the last 10 years, I think our job has gotten easier. That helps in all those cases.
There's
as far as holding up better at the gate and whatnot, I don't know that
there's
I see
nothing.
it
In other words, there's nothing that to the exterior eye of someone like yourself, you could say that in 1967 horse A was built differently than horse B in 2005.
Well, I mean, I can't account for all horses, but the horses that come through our gates, they are, I think, more fine bone, more speedy. They're flashier looking. They have more muscle than a previous the old days, a horse might, an Alan Jerkin style horse, for instance, might be a heavier boned, stockier sort of horse. A Wayne Lucas horse might be finer boned, but yet have quite defined muscles. You see that the fillies and mares now look more like the colts. You see that the 2-year-olds look more like 4-year-olds, and with an attitude as well.
Sure.
That goes along with that.
Well,
So that's the change that I've seen.
And that would tend to confirm what we hear. I don't know anything about how the pedigree people work and that sort of. I know nothing about that. All I know is what I see as a handicapper, and what you just said would tend to confirm what the visual expectation.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also, these horses are more precocious now. They have more foundation on the farms. They come to you with more knowledge. Yeah, they're a different horse. They are. Yeah.
I was going to make the analogy. That's like watching college basketball these days. The girls can flat out play. They're much better athletes.
Exactly.
I hate to say they're playing like the guys, but I appreciate how they're playing much more than we did 25 years ago. It was half court against half court. We have to take a commercial break. We're going to, Bobby will take some phone calls after the break. We've got a couple of calls on the line. We want you to please stay with us and be patient. We want to thank Lee Tomlinson, who's watching on the internet. And I did not greet our internet viewers. We want to do that. We'll be right back after this with Bob Duncan. Please stay with us.
Hundreds of vehicles for sale every day. The Car Show on TWTV. All of our featured dealers have a great selection of cars, trucks, minivans, SUVs, all just waiting to be driven off their lots. What we do in our TV showroom is give you all the information you need to find your own car by year, make, model, price, and more. Watch the Car Show and see what's new on the lot at Fusillo Ford, only on TWTV.
For years I've been telling you where to find Capital Mattress and Waterbed Warehouse. We're 200 yards south of the Circle in Latham. But some of you still think we're hard to find. We're not hard to find. We're right here on Route 9, right across from Latham Circle Mall. If you need a new mattress, futon, or waterbed and take the time to find us, you'll be glad you did, because you'll find a great selection of brand name mattresses at great everyday low prices. Capital Mattress and Waterbed Warehouse. We're easy to find, 200 yards south of the Circle, Latham.
Thank you for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Amello and Nick Kling, and we're delighted to be having this conversation with Bob Duncan, retired starter from the New York Racing Association, a consultant around the world. You talked a little bit about being in Ireland. I know when we had our phone conversation, you did some work for Aidan O'Brien for his horses who were coming over here. We'll talk about that a little later on. But we've got a couple of callers on the line, and we'd like to engage them in the program. So, Nikki, let's go to the line.
Our first caller this morning is Joe from Skodak. Joe, thanks for calling.
Yeah, hi, guys. I got a question, Bob. Something I've been wondering about for years. In a game of where nose can make a difference, how do they know that that starting gate is exactly perfectly straight?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks,
good
Joe.
question.
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah. The gate is lined by eye. But first of all, you're probably already aware that the gate is moved from start to start, and it's not placed in an exact position each time. Horses in American racing have a run up to the actual start of the race. There are certain positions on the racetrack where the starter and his crew angle the gate to try to create that geometric balance where the outside horse and the inside horse are running towards that point into a turn to give each a fair advantage at the start. So how do we know it? It's done by eye, and it's an attempt to be as fair as we can to both sides. The place, this comes up every year that we have a Breeders' Cup at Belmont Park with the 1.25 mile start.
Right.
And that's because you might have 14 horses sitting right on top of the turn there, running into our turn there. It's a debate I have every year, and I don't agree with a lot of people say that oh, you need to be down on the inside in this particular spot. Could be a death trap for you if you don't have the speed to compete in those first few jumps, the whole field just drowns you and covers you up. On the outside, a slow horse has the opportunity to filter in. And as I said, the gate's been adjusted quite a bit so that you can.
I've always thought you could see that the gate's adjusted.
From there, you certainly can. It seems exagerated, especially from the angle you look.
Track started Madison Square Garden for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Well, one quick follow-up on Joe's question, Bob. Occasionally there will be scratches at the gate, and then the horses will be repositioned to fill up the gap. So I guess that's a two-part question. A, why is that done? And B, how do you decide whether to move them all out one or move them in one?
Well, the first question in the starter's mind is what's the fairest thing for everybody? First of all, the first question is what's the safest thing?
Right.
And that has some influence in that. If I think I have a fractious field, if there's a problem that's developing in the gate, I might choose to back that field out and move them in to give these horses a breather and a chance to go back in the gate. Younger horses, maidens, 2-year-olds in particular, you try to eliminate that gap. It's in the horse's nature, as in a herd, to fill a vacuum.
Right.
So there's always a tendency for horses to go into that gap. So ideally, I want to move them in and out. In or out truly doesn't matter. Everyone's having an equal shift. It doesn't really have a lot of effect on the fairness of the start.
Our next caller is Jerry in Albany. Jerry, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just wanted to say first, as a fan, as a wagerer, I think the initial loading of the gate and the time, obviously, it takes is really the key thing that we're concerned about or looking for. And I'm wondering why tracks seem to load fields 2 at a time, and some don't. And it seems to even change at tracks different times of year. I'm not sure in New York. It seems like they're doing it. I'm not sure, but I think at Saratoga they may do them 1 at a time, and I'm just wondering why they wouldn't all do it 2 at a time with big fields. It seems much more efficient, much faster, and I wonder if it's a question of personnel or just not enough people to do that.
That is one issue, Jerry. There's a couple of factors involved here. In New York, they do load a split load with fields of 8 horses or larger. But what we found is that with maidens in particular, it sometimes develops, some confusion develops when you have 2 horses up to the gate. If one should balk, then the other balks, and now you have horses sidling in and out. It creates a safety issue both for the horses and the assistant starters. So we found that the time saved in split loading, is what we call it, is not that great when you consider the risks involved in the shorter field sizes. You led into your question by stating that you're of the opinion that the quicker the load, the better. As we had spoken about earlier, with the new techniques that we're using, I don't care how long it takes, as long as you're able to communicate with your horse and keep him as relaxed as possible, you can take all day to load the field. It's not going to make a difference.
Bob, I want to say this now. First of all, I'm delighted to have you saying what you're saying, the way you're saying it, to our audience of handicappers. And as an educator, I'm a believer in that perception is reality, and if people don't like the reality, then you got to change the perception. And basically, I think that the industry, your gate crew guys got to get these marketing guys to kind of consistently explain to the public that when the field is in the hands of the starter, if you will, that these are the issues that are prime in your mind and the mind of everybody who does that. And if it appears long, there's a reason. And people should be comfortable with that. We've had enough jockey injuries and gate injuries that folks ought to be aware of that, and so you take a deep breath and let it go. I don't think the industry does enough to do that. I'm going to ask you to write a column about it pretty soon.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up?
I think Jerry's
I guess Jerry is gone. We got another email, and this is a horse that I remember, but my brain is getting cloudy in my old age. Can you ask Mr. Duncan if all horses go through what Song of Africa went through at the gate? I believe it was instinct that made her that nervous. Do they all protect themselves like she was doing at one point or another? So, Bob, can you first tell our audience a little bit about the horse, which you said you were familiar with, and then try and respond to the question?
Sure. A little brief history of the horse. Song of Africa was racing in Europe and had an accident going somewhere in a small trailer where the trailer tipped over and she was trapped in the trailer. After that accident, they were unable to get her back into a starting gate, or a trailer for that matter. I guess they did eventually get her tranked and get her shipped over to this country. John Kimmel took over training, and they called on Monty Roberts to come east to Payson Park and work with her. Monty had devised this piece of equipment, some call it a rug or a blanket.
I know who. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
sure. You drape it over the horse's hind quarter, and what it does is creates a bit of a cushion and sort of neutralizes the sensation of the gait on the horse. It takes away this ticklish feel that the gait has for some horses. Monty spent a week working with her, long days for a week, reacquainting her to the starting gait, and it all began with, as I said before, this getting acquainted with the horse and connecting to the horse where she would trust him to keep her safe. And a combination of that with the blanket allows her to race. And we had a wonderful, for me it was an eye-opening experience in New York one time. She was running 7/8 of a mile. She'd already had a number of starts. She goes into the starting gate. Richie Migliori was on the horse. A horse next to her prematurely moved to the doors, and she ran at the doors, and she did it so quickly that the blanket fell off her in the gate. Well, when the blanket fell off her and she touched the side, she just dropped right down to one side and laid down in the gate. The blanket was the thing that had kept this from happening. So we were able to open the front doors, get her out, and once we put the blanket back on her, she sighed, relaxed, and went back in the gate and broke well and ran well that day. So the blanket was very effective for that particular horse.
And I want to point out that the evolution of the blanket is in Monty's book. That whole story.
Oh, sure. Monty loves his equipment.
And it's not about Song of Africa. But I just think it's a terrific. If you're interested in this game at all, you don't have to be interested only in the pedigree aspect. I think that it's a terrific book, and it's an easy read.
It is. But I have to tell you this thing about equipment at the starting gate, and it's. When we do these clinics around the country, quite often I'll work with a horse and I'll use a simple thing, a rope halter and a 12-foot lead. And you'll work with a horse that's been a problem at someone's gate, and the horse will go on the gate, and the first thing they say is, where can I get that halter and that lead? And what I try to encourage them is that it's not about the equipment, it's about this communication, this ability to get inside the horse's head and make that horse comfortable.
My email inbox has been inundated, and we're going to try and get as many of these in as we can. While I'm asking this question, I'll let Tom try and figure out how to convince Bob to stay a little longer. Here's a question about a horse, Bob, that you've worked with. Now, I don't know whether what the chronology is, whether what the writer asks is before or after you worked with Rock Hard 10, but it says, when Rock Hard 10 was being loaded at Hollywood Park, the head starter yelled at the horse, back, 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 several times, showing the horse who was boss. The horse went backward several steps, and the starter easily led the horse into the gate. Do you use this method with headstrong horses, and will it work?
Yeah, actually, Gary Brinson led that horse. He's the starter, and he took the unusual position of putting the horse in the gate himself that day because he had schooled that horse. Rock Hard 10 is a horse we had worked with, and Gary and I agree on a lot of things, and this method is something that the method he uses is a method we use here. He tends to use more vocal commands, which can be incorporated, and he certainly got the results he needed.
Let's take our next caller while I'm reading some of these emails.
Let's go to Utica.
Let's go to Utica and speak to Bob. Thanks for waiting, Bob. Go ahead.
Good morning.
A couple of rare occasions, I've seen the starters that swing the whips in the back to get the horses in. I've actually hit the horse, it seemed like, exactly when the starter called for the start. And I'm wondering if that's a no-no.
Okay, I think what he's talking about, they're in the gate, and sometimes you see him holding the tail, and sometimes, go ahead.
You know, that's something we used to do over the years for slow horses, have somebody be behind the horse, and at the break try to encourage him by slapping him on the butt with the strap. My personal feeling on that after being on the gate for a while was that if you need to hit this horse at the start like that, it's already too late. It's already too late. And secondly, we talked about perception. It didn't dawn on me for a number of years, and one day Bill Mott came up to me after the race. He said, I just have to ask you. He said, I noticed that every once in a while you guys hit a horse. He said, some people are going to think you're trying to give that horse an advantage. And I thought about it for a bit, and I thought, he's right. It's the perception of what it is.
Absolutely.
So at least while I was starting, I'm not sure what Richie's doing now, but we stopped any sort of encouragement like that.
Bob, a quick question for me before we go back to the phones. The general perception amongst guys like myself is that Bill Mott is just a consummate horseman. How has he been to work with over the years?
He's a pleasure to work with. Bill Bill is the consummate horseman. He's always looking to learn something new too, which is the key. Inside our fences at the racetrack, we have a level of paranoia. You know, there's only so many horses and there's only so many good owners, and people are often afraid to admit that they don't know something or appear that they're trying to learn something. Someone like Bill takes the high road. Todd Fletcher takes the high road. There are a number of our young trainers who are hungry for information, and they're always looking for something that's going to give them an edge.
So it's no accident that they're successful.
Absolutely not.
By the way, I'm writing this down. Inside our fences, there's sometimes a sense of paranoia. I think that's a great line.
That's a great line. Let's go to the phones and speak to Dominic in Saratoga. Dominic, go ahead.
Good morning. Bob mentioned like a jockey like Jerry Bailey will sort of alert his horse when the gates will open. Now, is there any stipulated time limit after the gates are loaded, at which time the gates will be opened up? And if so, is there any way, and are the jockeys alerted to that?
Yeah, it kind of goes to what I had said before, Dominic. Thank you. We're trying to hit a prescribed starting time, post time, and we anticipate how long it's going to take to load a particular field of horses, be they maidens or distant turf horses. The ideal being to have the last horse walking into the gate about 10-15 seconds after post time. Having said that, there are often delays. Sometimes it's a minute or 2 minutes after post time, and what we try to do in New York is to communicate with the riders and the assistant starters to let them know how long things are going to take. This is somewhat off your question, but it has to do with the fact of horses being in the gate a long time. I wanted to mention this to you before. By not being up on the stand, for me, walking in front of the horses, sometimes you can see something happening in a horse's eyes before it actually happens. And at that point, we'll say, I'll call to someone behind the gate and say, fellas, let's back this horse out now, and let's avoid the problem before the explosion occurs. So we can do that with a real critical situation with a horse, and once again inform everybody, we're backing the horse out, the rest of you can relax, this is going to take a moment. For us, that's the key, the communication, and the time isn't so much of an issue.
Bob, based on the phone lines in my email box, I think OTB should give you a show. This is a great.
You can stay with us, all right?
Still snowing out.
Here's a great two-part question from John. John asks, one, how do you handle shippers that may not have as many or you may not have as much information about? And two, do trainers ever approach the starters about the performance of their horse or lack of it after the race?
Two very good questions. Certainly, when a horse comes from out of town, we try to get with the trainer and get any information we need. We have a wonderful network between starters around the country. If they have one of their horses going out of town and it's a problem that needs special attention, they can't wait to get on the phone and call you, because they don't want a reputation of sending a horse to you that was difficult, that didn't perform well. So it's a two-way street, particularly on big days like Breeders' Cup Day and whatnot. We'll often call around the country to different horses that have been entered for the day and ask about the horses. So, and the second question was?
The second question was, do trainers ask you about their horses?
Yes, they do.
Caution the race a couple of times.
That's, that's a tough part of the job. I mean, horses get left, and sometimes it's the starter's fault, sometimes it's the assistant starter, sometimes it's the jock, and sometimes it's just the horse. And once again, the big word today is communication. If you can keep an open line with the trainer, and they're aware that you're trying to work with them, we're all looking for the same results. Those conversations usually go quite well, but they do occur daily.
Let's go to Clifton Park, and we'll take another email. We'll go one-to-one.
Harry in Clifton Park. Harry, thanks for waiting.
Yes, hi. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
For years, I was at the track, and I've noticed the starters always starting the races from these green stands, and now I've seen them on the inside of the rail starting the races.
Yep.
And I'm curious why they're doing that now, and I would like to see in the future or sometime that I would like to see them go back to the old way, because I thought that was more tradition and a lot nicer.
Okay, you like the way that looked. All right, Bobby, go ahead.
Well, I think it looks nice too.
Let's put a guy up there and pretend he's starting. No, I'm only kidding.
Truth of the
Good
matter,
question.
It is a good question. But truth of the matter is, from experience, if you look around the country too, Harry, that more and more starters are doing it every day. They're starting from the ground. The reason being, you just have a much better view of what you're doing. And the closer, I often started from the racing surface itself on that side of the rail. You're able to see the horse's feet better. You're able to create better starts.
Okay. Let's take
one more email.
No, I think we have to. We just got word that we need to take a commercial break. We've got a couple of calls on the line. Please stay with us. That'll give us an opportunity to read through some of these emails and get back to you. And I'm looking out the window. It's still snowing, so Bob's going to be with us for a little longer. Stay with us, please. Thank you.
Discover the magic of learning with Disney Learning Adventures. Hooray! The new video series that combines Disney friends and learning fundamentals into adventures for eager young minds.
Now that's T for Tigger.
Start with Winnie the Pooh ABCs.
P for Pooh.
Developed by Disney and leading educators to teach letter recognition, word formation, and beginning phonics.
Wonderful.
Then kids can see the world with Mickey and Friends.
We're going around the world in 80 days.
Discover new languages. And learn about our world with Mickey's Seeing the World.
That looks pretty good.
Learning has never been so much fun with Disney Learning Adventures. Both DVDs for $29.90 plus $5.95 shipping and handling. You'll also receive these fun-filled flashcards, ABCs and 1, 2, 3s with Pooh. These flashcards are a $9.95 value. Yours free with your paid order. Must be 18 years or older to call.
Back, Tom Amello, Nick Kling. Our guest is Bob Duncan, retired NYRA starter. We've got a couple of phone calls on the line and a couple of emails. Nikki, email, and then we'll go back to the line.
We've got a multi-part question here. We'll stick to the part that's about the starting gate and our guest, and you sort of touched on this before, Bob. The questioner says, how unfair do you believe the start at Belmont is for 10 furlong races such as the Breeders' Cup Classic?
I don't think it's as unfair as some people might imagine. I think it all depends on the skill of your horse, his initial burst of speed, what your plans are for your tactics during the race. We've seen him win from the inside and the outside.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say the same thing. I think post position and post position bias. Nick calls occasionally refers to people as biased nitwits. I think the whole analysis of the influence of post is moot unless you're analyzing the context of the race.
Absolutely.
Depending on where the speed is put.
Yes.
You know, if the fastest horse in the field is in post 14 under Jerry Bailey, he's making the top. I don't care what happens.
It brings me to an interesting thought too. Over the years, starting races at Belmont and Aqueduct, and sometimes Saratoga as well, but mostly Aqueduct, if the start occurs in the mile chute or in the 7/8 chute, all that section back there, if you look at your charts, invariably the outside horse is breaking on the lead every time. And I've had letters written and people say, what's the advantage to the outside? The inside horse has a disadvantage. The truth is, it's an optical illusion. We used to play a game when I was a kid on the gate, and I didn't know this. We would bet quarters on whose horse broke well, and the smarter guys would always take the outside horse. Of course, we'd use the chart the next morning to determine who won. And the reason being is if the angle of the camera is such that when the break occurs, if the outside horse should just step, and they often do, step away from their horses, it creates the situation where it looks like he's a length in front of the field, whereas the inside horse, you don't know how well he did relative to the rest until they get equal to the camera. So
it's like the finish line. It's like the finish line too.
You have to keep that in mind when you're looking at the charts about the start.
Terrific.
We've
Let's
got
go to Lake George.
A couple of patient callers. Mike in Lake George is next. Mike, go ahead.
Good morning.
How you doing? Nice talking to Bob. What I was wondering was, like yesterday there was a maiden race. The outside horse, first time, do you feel the detention barn really stresses them out, those first timers, those 2-year-olders? Now they got the detention barn and they're in there with a cup on their mouth, and they're, it's for the first time in their life, and a few of them just seem to come out of that detention barn to the gate really stressed.
That's a terrific question. Mike, that's a great question.
Let's expand that, Bob, into, I know that, you've been, doing other things since Naira started the detention barn, but I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. Does the intrusion of something artificial like the detention barn for 5 or 6 hours, is that likely to change what the horse has learned when it comes to the starting gate, and as the caller Mike asked, particularly for first-time starters?
It doesn't change anything, but it could increase stress level for the horse. But that's something else that can be worked on. There's no reason that you couldn't find a way to school your horse at the detention barn to get them more comfortable.
Sounds like an opportunity for Bob Duncan's associates. No, I mean, if in fact there's a progression in the process to make the horse comfortable for the gate, then it's perfect. It makes perfect sense. You can't just rip him from its stall, throw him in the barn, and expect him to come out happy as a clam.
Right. There's a cowboy expression. It's a Pirelli expression. Actually says horses react to what happens before what happens. If you make any sense of that at all, what it's telling you is that there's a sequence of events. When a sequence of events occurs to a horse, he starts reacting to the first event in that sequence because he knows what's going to follow. So the detention barn at some point in time could just relate to the fact the horse says, oh gosh, every time I come here, I have to go out there and run around that racetrack. So it's just like anything you change in a horse's morning on race day, lets the horse know that he's racing.
Now, you brought up the horse, changing the horse's morning. One of the things that we've talked about, especially Saratoga, we get the weather report from our good friend Tom Maley that says it's not going to rain for 3 weeks, and then midway through the second race we get the tornado of the month, and we've scratched down to 4 horses. I've always wondered why we don't have draw a main track field for Saratoga, or places where we're going to get rained out. So we had full fields, and you get full purses and a full betting field, as well as a turf field. But and I've had people tell me it's about that morning, and so we really don't want to disrupt these horses' mornings too often, do we?
That has a lot. No, you don't. Horses have a schedule they're used to, and once you change that, they become suspicious.
This is kind of a weird follow-up that I guess is different than what Tom just asked. If a horse comes to the starting gate, particularly a young horse, and they're used to working in the morning when the weather is relatively tranquil, what happens when they come to the gate? A, if it's pouring rain, and B, if now the track is a sea of slop and they may not have come to the gate in that kind of a situation. Does that factor into what happens?
Probably less than you would imagine.
Oh, great.
Yeah. In fact, certain weather issues might be distracting to a horse. A heavy wind, a gusty wind. We occasionally find that on those really hot, humid days that the horses seem to not really be into their game that day, and they can be a little more difficult to deal with. Other than that, weather's not that much of an issue. Track surface isn't that much of an issue. Horses may be more athletic on a track that has some consistency to where they get good traction, but it's not a matter of a mental difference to the horse.
Let's go to Andy in Niskayuna. Andy, thanks for waiting.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Great.
Morning.
So I wanted to ask Bob, in his opinion, what does he think the main reasons why a horse throws a jockey at the gate, and are there any particular behaviors before the start that might indicate that the horse may do so, or if it's just no way of knowing at all? Thanks, I'll listen.
Thanks,
Great question, Andy.
It is a good question, and that's what makes our job tough. You might feel that you've done all your homework in the morning with a horse, or it may be one of these horses that come from out of town where you have information, and the horse arrives at your gate that afternoon and things just aren't going well for him. It could be any of a myriad of things. It could.
I think you already sort of answered that question. By being on the ground, you get a chance to look in their eyes, and they're going to send. It appears, based on what you've said, and believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know very much about horses as individuals, but they're going to send a signal before they explode, more or less.
Quite often, yeah. Sometimes you don't see the signal, but that horse that's dumping these riders behind the gate. If we want to be honest with ourselves, not all horses want to be race horses. It's a job. It's a job they do in order to survive and hopefully go on and be dads and moms and live a good life. It's a partnership we have. It's just like we don't want to go to work every day when we get up. But it's not that they won't perform and they won't perform up to expectations, but sometimes they're reluctant.
You're funny, because if horses, I've always said that if horses were people, many of them would call them sick.
Oh, there you go. There you
okay?
go. Sure.
And you're right about horses run, but we race.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's go to.
Hold on one. I got to follow up on
Go
because. You know, what you two were just talking about reminds me of one of the reasons that I became a racing fan. And so, Bob, maybe you can speak to this. And my wife took me to Saratoga in 1988, and it was like somebody had flipped on a light switch. I just loved it. And one of the reasons that I did is, if you have any amount of humanity, you have to just have a deep respect and appreciation for the thoroughbred athlete. These horses go out and run their guts out, and most of them want to do their best, and at least it seems that way, and they run hard, and they're very, very game, and I mean, I just love them to death. Can you speak to that, how that affects what you have done with horses, how that impacted your career in the business?
Well, I can't agree with you more. First of all, I mean, I look at a horse and I get chills. I think they are just the most magnificent creature. Can't wait to get my hands on them and touch them, be around them. They're pure of heart. They're gamer than Dick Tracy. They'll do things for you, willingly or otherwise. They'll perform for you because we have a problem with horses where we often project our feelings and emotions on the animal, and it's not fair to the horse. The horse has specific needs and desires that are specific to a herd animal, but they are courageous and they will put out for you, and they are forgiving and they're not mean, and they have wonderful qualities that you like to see in your fellow human being. So there's nothing quite as exciting as watching. I tell people after 37 years of doing it, that explosion when they leave the gate and the thrust of that power and the ability to get up to speed, and it's thrilling to me to this day.
I became like the cigarette smoker that quits and is a fanatic. I do not understand why more people in this country don't see what we see.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
I used to be a conventional sport. I'm really not interested in other sports anymore. Horse racing is so far superior.
I agree with you.
Let's go to the phone lines.
Fort Edward.
And we're going to go to Fort Edward, and it's either Alex or Alexis. Alex, go ahead.
This is Alex.
Hi, Alex.
I just want to say, guys, this is one of the best shows I've ever seen you guys do. But
Thank you.
I wanted to say something to Bob. For years, I used to think Fred Caposello was the best starter in the business, because I remember like 30 years ago for the first race at Saratoga at 12:59. All the horses would be in the gate, and when the clock on the infield tote board would click to 1 o'clock, he would say, "It is now post time."
You love that?
And the horses would go.
Yeah, I used to love
and
that.
it was pretty much like that. That was my experience for years, and I used to think this is the smoothest. I used to think Fred had a starter button up in the,
well, I'll tell you,
that's in the broadcast booth, and now it seems like it's. It's typically 1 to 3 minutes past post time a lot of times till these races start. What's changed over the years?
I can tell you what's changed.
Great question. Thank you, Alex.
It is a great question, and you'd be amazed how the starter is often equated to the announcer, because the announcer has the final word at the start. What Fred would do would be he'd wait. He would say, as the crowd draws closer to the rail, it means but one thing, it is now post time. He was waiting until those horses were in the gate pretty much when he would make that announcement. And so what you're hearing there is it might have taken 3 minutes to put that field in the gate, and you heard that announcement at the end. But that's interesting you could say that, because I lived outside the gates of Belmont Park, and from my house I could hear Fred Caposello say those words. So.
And thanks, Alex, for your call. And in effect, Bob, what Alex was asking about, now, Tom Durkin will say they're in the gate. Yeah. But then if there's a little delay, that may well be what you were speaking about before. You want to give the horses, time, to get settled and that sort of thing. It's more important to have the horses ready than than for Tom to say they're in the gate and for you to push the button.
That's true. And if there, excuse me, Tom, if there is a delay, we have communication with the stewards who will then ask to call Tom, and so he can inform the public of what's going on at the gate.
Before we go to either mediums, we would be remiss if we did not ask you to talk a little bit about the start of a jump race, because we like the jump races, and we're big fans of the NSA. And right now, people aren't happy. Could you talk about starting a jump, walking those puppies up there?
That's a wonderful organization, and there's some wonderful people that run it, and they are true horsemen, and they love their animals. So I'm on their team as well.
Okay, so are we.
Now, when it comes down to starting the race, I sure wish they had a starting gate. It'd be a lot easier. But the truth of the matter is, it started back in the old days when they didn't have starting gate at these farms and whatnot, so they would have to line them up. But they've come up with a system now. They have a starter that goes from track to track now. So this year, for the first time in New York, they had their own starter. Richie Brosseau didn't start them. And the good thing about that is it's created some uniformity as to how the starts are affected. They have a system where these horses are circled and brought up, put into an area that's sort of box-like. It's marked by cones, and the horses are allowed to advance within this box. And then when the starter feels they're relatively in line, he lets them go. But as you know, 2 miles and 5/8 front, a half length, that's not that big a deal. And quite often, always, it's the riders that make the good starts. And the administration, the jumping horse administration, Bill Gallo and his people have said, look, when we go to places like Saratoga where they're gambling on these events, you need to at least cooperate at the start and make it as uniform and timely as possible. And the riders have cooperated the last few years, and the starts have gotten better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bob.
We've got an email, Bob, that's perfectly timed, because the writer has a question, and maybe you can expand on it after you answer his question and tell our listeners what you're doing now. And the question is, I recall reading that Mr. Duncan spent time at Coolmore in Ireland working with some of Aidan O'Brien's horses. Can you ask him to describe why he was called in, what process he used, and how the facilities available at that stable compare with U.S. outfits? And then, as I say, maybe you can expand on that a little bit into what you're doing now.
Well, first of all, I got involved with the Coolmore horses at Ballydoyle for Aidan O'Brien through a phone call where they were actually looking to buy a starting gate for their farm, because they felt their horses weren't performing well at the starts, that they were losing races in the Breeders' Cup at the start. And they were actually looking to buy a couple of American starting gates, have them brought over to 2 of their training centers so that they could use the gate. And I said, well, I'm certainly willing to act as agent to find you a gate. I said, but I think you're heading in the wrong direction. I think it's the schooling process that you need to work with. The machine isn't that significant. So what transpired there was they invited me over to see their gate, see what it was, and I flew over and worked with one horse in particular they were having difficulty with. And Aidan, who is a very astute horseman, he's a young man, was impressed with the fact that this horse who they couldn't get in the gate before was suddenly walking in and literally grazing in the grass under the gate while he was standing in there. So Aidan said, wow, why didn't we know this before? And it gave me the opportunity to spend some time with him and kind of explain my approach to what we do and the difference between why our horses are quicker out of the gate. So about 10 days before Breeders' Cup, Aidan called back and asked that I would go over and work with those 5 horses he entered. And we spent a day with those horses trying to work with each one as an individual and figure out what problems they had at the gate and what we could do to make them more competitive.
And so just expand on that, Bob. What, now that you're not, the NYRA head starter anymore, what are you doing? I assume you're in some kind of a consulting capacity, but just tell our listeners, in case there might be any customers out there.
Well, you never know. I'm looking for work.
We have owners watching. We have owners watching.
It's a number of things. The bulk of interest has been from other racetracks that have heard about the different techniques we're using. And quite often that word is spread by trainers that come to New York or jockeys. And so I've had the opportunity, believe it or not, and this is, you're going to think this is a really tough job, but I go to the Caribbean in the winter. Yeah. I spent the last 3 years going to Barbados and Trinidad and Jamaica. They have racing, and it's a wonderful thing, and I get to work with their horses in the crews and their associations, and that's great fun. So a lot of it has to do with working with gate crews and trying to spread the word about this information that we now have that's made our job safer and better for the horses.
Yeah, the only other thing I'm thinking of, because this is, information is the edge, and so I'm wondering if next Breeders' Cup we're going to have Bob Duncan gate picks.
You certainly don't want to go by my handicapping.
No. Who's going to just who is and who isn't going to get out of the gate?
Well,
we've got a phone call. Let's go to Albany and talk to Jim.
Yeah, we've got a good friend of ours on the line.
He's a friend of mine as well.
Jim, I hope this is a good question. Now you're not going to make it too hard, I hope.
Jim, don't give me a hard time. You always do.
No, I won't have to back you out. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Jim.
Bob, first of all, I want to say thank you from everybody, all the horsemen and the owners and trainers. You've given yourself and your staff over the years have given a lot of horses a chance at a career, and a lot of others prolonging their careers.
That's kind
my question being, in your opinion, and for the average fan that might see, what challenges are there from the starting gate at nighttime? Does nighttime racing or how the gate is lit up, whether it be inside or outside, pose any challenges for you or the crew?
You know, it is a great question, Jim, and quite frankly, I've never worked at night. That's not true. I did work a quarter horse meet at night, but I don't have enough experience to tell you whether there's a difference. I've had trainers tell me that their horses reacted differently going out in the evening, but nothing works better than a strong foundation. If you've done your job getting the basics into your horse around the starting gate, they overcome a lot of adversity, and I would think night would be one of those things they'd be able to deal with.
Jim, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you thought that question up, or whether Sheikh Mohammed might be watching on the internet and emailed you to see if you would ask it.
No, actually, I've been trying to find out what's really best, because there are some racetracks that have lights actually suspended inside the gate to light up inside each individual stall. And some just use whether it's lights attached to the tractor or the regular outside track lights. So it's just the shadows that are created and how the horse might go into that space. It's just a question of whether Bob has either had experience with it or he's heard through the network or starters what might work best.
Jimmy, the natural question I have, and I'm going to ask Bob to get the answer and get back to us. Do they school at night? If you're going to break at night, do you school at night?
School in the morning, but you make a good point, Jim, because there's an occurrence early in the spring and late in the fall where we have those long shadows around the starting gate in the morning, and it makes a difference when you school the horse. So what they see visually does have impact. Once again, though, the more worldly you can make your horse by giving them good experiences and challenges in the morning and getting them comfortable with them, the better chance they'll deal with it in the afternoon.
It's funny, Bob, because you said that, because it all comes back to one morning I watched the chief take a horse to the gate, and he'd always taken her on early in the morning on cloudy days and everything. One time on a sunny day, she didn't like the shadows. She didn't want to go into a dark spot. So
great question, Jimmy. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
All right, take care, guys.
Looking forward to seeing you, and I'll give Jim just a slight kick. I'm sure that is a question because he's making plays at night.
There you go. There you go.
I think that there's nothing like a good handicapper or a good horseman to raise a question like that. So we appreciate the call.
I got to remind Jim. I hope he's still listening. Jim, I'm still waiting to take that month's trip to Dubai.
Right.
And interview the sheik, and all expenses paid. So keep that in mind. Let's go to Scotia and speak to George. George, thanks for waiting.
Question for Mr. Duncan.
Yes, sir.
I was watching this channel the other day, and I was wondering.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's. Do we have any?
No, we don't have any new emails. So I believe Bob
in Saratoga.
Bob in Saratoga is next. Bob, good morning.
We're getting good, Nick.
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Bob.
Well, first of all, a couple of questions. Mr. Duncan, you're the best.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
My whole appreciation of racing changed when I got to go in the Wright Street gate and stand by your starting gate in the morning and watch the affection that you and your people have for it. And now that you've become this world traveler, I want to know two things. Do they fly the white Jeep to Barbados when you go there, so that you can catch a couple of nods between races or something?
You've seen me napping on the backside, I guess.
And but the main thing is I got to go to California. I think the gentleman's name was Tucker Slender of California.
He's the father of the current starter at San Diego.
Right. And I wondered why in New York they don't load two at a time. And if someone comes to you in the morning and says, you know, this is, of course, we've had a problem with standing in a gate like a 2-year-old, what does it take for you to acquiesce and load that horse last? To give him.
It's a great question.
Thanks, Bob. That's a great question.
Thanks a lot. And a pleasure to see you, Bob. Thanks for your kindness over there.
I think we had that. We might even ask you that question. We had that question in Saratoga. I think Pletcher had a horse breaking from post 1 in a maiden race, and he was last to load. He won for fun, and folks were wondering about that. But his first question was 2 at a time, and then we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
last load.
Loading 2 at a time is helpful. Once again, with the skills we have now, it's not necessary. Ideally, in an ideal world, when they're all walking in perfectly, it looks nice, and it theoretically should cut your time in half to load. It doesn't, quite frankly. If you're loading 12 horses, it might save you 15 seconds. And there are occasions where it creates a longer load because of the confusion that develops when 2 horses walk in the gate and they're close to each other near the gate. The order of loading, that's a question that comes up almost every year for every starter. And every time a new starter comes around, a trainer will come up and ask him the same question. He'll come up, he'll say, my horse is fractious, I'd like you to load him late. It's a policy that some tracks honor, some starters. I can tell you it opens up a can of worms that you'll never satisfy everybody, and as soon as you start doing it, you'll start hearing from other trainers saying you're being unfair. And I can tell you a great story about this. It was about 3 years ago in Saratoga. I happened to be walking through the grandstand, ran into Wayne Lucas. We exchanged pleasantries, and Wayne said, you're not going to believe what happened to me the other day. And Wayne happens to be friends with the starters out in California. He gets along well with them. He does a good job with his horse. He says, Gary, referring to Hauser, Gary Brinson, held Bobby Frankel's horse out of the gate, put my horse in, loaded him last. Bobby's horse broke on the lead and he won. He says, now, was that fair? He said he gave him an advantage. And, you know, I said, well, I don't know the circumstances, but that was one of those examples where loading out of order, he felt he had a disadvantage. Truth of the matter is, the compromise we've come up with in New York now is where if a trainer comes up to me with that opinion of his horse that he's fractious, I said, look, we're going to load it. First of all, we need to school him. Hopefully we have time to get that done and maybe make some corrections in the morning. Secondly, we'll load him in the gate and we'll observe him. My opportunity to stand in front of that horse. If I think he's developing into a situation that's going to go off in our face, I'll say, let's back him out. So we put him in an order, we back him out, we load the rest of the field for safety reasons. We put the horse back in, and then we effect a start. That horse then goes on the starters list, and he's not allowed to race again until he goes back for some more remedial work. So we need to leave it up to the gate crew to make that determination. I think if the horses are schooled properly, you can avoid most of those opportunities. And if you do run into one, back him out. Give the horse a breather, gives everyone a breather, put him in late, and then work on the problem later.
We're going to take our last commercial break of this hour. We've got a couple of phone calls on the line. We'll get to those callers as soon as we get back. Tom Amello, Nick Kling, and the very interesting Bob Duncan. Stay with us, please.
Sorry, sir. Your credit card's been declined.
Are you one of the millions of Americans with $2,000 or more in credit card debt? Would you like to cut your monthly payments by as much as half? Credit Guard of America can help.
Credit Guard's money management solutions even include credit counseling.
They helped with my home equity loan.
And my IRS problems.
Whether you're current and making minimum payments, behind or about to fall behind, learn how you can achieve financial freedom with Credit Guard's free money management counseling service.
We did! Do you have million-dollar dreams? Go to twtv.com and search for the home of your dreams. Or search by price and find a home that fits your budget. From a cozy cottage to a home fit for royalty, twtv.com puts the best homes in the area at your fingertips. That million-dollar home might be just a dream, but you'll be sure to find a home that you can call your own at twtv.com.
TWTV, Time Warner Cable Channel 7.
back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 3 phone calls for you. Nick was unable to negotiate a trip to Dubai with Jim Corns. We're sitting here trying to negotiate a trip to the Caribbean with Bob Duncan. Let's go to Schenectady.
I think Chet Latham is next. Chet, thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, like a 2-part thing for Bob there. Is there like a time limit that a horse has to be lowered into the gate? And has there ever been a situation where the horse is like too fractious or unruly, where like if he's scratched, does the track steward make that call, or is it possible the starter can request that the horse be scratched because he's can't get in the gate?
Good question.
Wonderful. Thanks,
What's
Chet.
the other part, Chet?
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Chet, that is a great question. It's usually up to the starter to determine, and from my perspective, the last few years, especially with 2-year-olds, I've kind of taken an approach where I want to be more conservative. I'd rather err on the side of caution. I don't see the benefit in struggling with a young first-time starter in particular, trying to get him to go into the starting gate, delaying the load for the other horses that might be in the gate, and then having him perform less than adequately because there was a struggle getting him in the gate. I'd rather call the stewards and suggest a scratch of that horse and say, let's bring him back another day. You get an argument from management sometimes saying, oh, we're losing handle, but the fact of the matter is that handle's going to come back real soon. He'll be back in the entries in a couple of days. So
quick follow-up, Bob. When do you decide to go to the blindfold?
Yep.
The blindfold is probably one of the first things you'd go to when you're in a struggle, simply because it's probably the least intrusive and requires less manpower.
Should they go to the blindfold sooner?
In some cases, yeah, I suppose they should.
Okay.
We got an email that I just got to get in here. It's from our friend Matt Graves, the retired Matt Graves, and he has a question for Bob. He said, Bob, we miss you. Did you ever fear any horse, and who was the toughest customer you ever had to handle?
Gosh, I was afraid of a lot of horses growing up. It's a wonderful thing. Knowledge is a wonderful thing. It's usually fear of the unknown that gets you in trouble. And the more we learn, the less fearful I am around horses. The toughest horse I've ever known, there have been some horses that you just fretted about the whole night before when you saw his name in the entries. It's not so much fear of getting hurt, it's fear of doing a bad job. It's a fear of not accomplishing what you tried to accomplish. I'm going to do a little name dropping here. One of the greatest lessons in my life around the racetrack was with a horse called Seattle Slew back in the 70s. Because Seattle Slew was a particularly independent sort, and you weren't going to manhandle him. You weren't going to be able to rough him up. And that was one of those instances where the first time he ran, we didn't know a lot about the horse. Bill Turner was pretty secretive about it. In fact, not many people knew a lot about the horse. Well, he showed up at the gate one day ready to eat somebody's lunch, and the fellow that handled him that day had a major tussle with him, and in the process of trying to contain him, had a huge fight. And the lesson we learned that day was that there's no fighting this horse. You need to find some compromise and find a different way to deal with him. So that kind of set the stage for what we've learned in the years following.
And I'm not going to let you get over it, because before he left today, Anthony Mormino pointed out something neither Nick or I knew, is that you were hanging on to Seattle Slew at one point in time with Cordero sitting in the saddle. Could you just touch on that briefly, and then we'll take callers and we'll get out of here.
Well, after the start, after that particular start where he was difficult, Bill had asked that I handle him, and I handled him every time he ran in New York. And the race that Tony was referring to was the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And in that race, it was in the days when we used to have these flat doors, and they were very easily broken open. You could push it with your shoulder and pop it open. So we all had the experience and the practice of rushing out the front with these horses as they went, because you couldn't contain them in the stall. So on that particular day, Slew was down about post 2, and it was a muddy track, and there was lots going on. And Slew reached this point, and Angel and I both felt it when it was coming. You could feel him swelling. And he just reached this point where he couldn't take the weight any longer, and he burst through the door. So I took a running start, and I was a lot younger then. My knees would allow me to do it, and I landed on the ground in front, and Angel and I were able to get the horse stopped and put him back in the gate. And that, it's one of those Pyrrhic victories. I mean, it was the race of his life in defeat. He was beaten a nose that day.
Very quickly, Bob in Schenectady. You got to be quick, Bob. Go ahead.
Hello, Bob.
Hello, Bob. Bob's not there. We're going to go to Tim and Winenskill. Tim, a quick question for Bob Duncan.
Yeah, quick question. What's the significance of the bell at the starting gate?
Thanks, Tim. Great question.
Great question it is. You might remember in the movie Seabiscuit, they took the bell out in the middle of the night and would ring it behind the horse. It goes back to the old days when they thought that you need to frighten the horse away from the starting gate. We now school in the morning at most of our racetracks without even using the bell. The bell probably is more for the general public. It's been my opinion that it should just ring in the grandstand and not at the starting gate.
Amen. That's going to bring us to the end of the show. We want to thank Dan and Patrick downstairs for their help today. We really appreciate it. And I can't be more grateful to you, Bob. I mean, this has been fantastic.
We're going to have to get them back.
We're going to keep.
Before your busiest season, you got to come back.
We just want to tell you that NGS is the name of the business. It's Natural Gate Schooling LLC, and it doesn't have a website. Can you imagine that? So if you want to get in touch with Bob Duncan, you can get in touch with him through TrackFax at P.O. Box 554 in East Greenwich, or you can email us. You get me at TrackFax at nycap.roadrunner.com. You get Nick Kling at Doc Fonda at telenet.net. There it is. We'll be back next week for another hour and a half, next Sunday. We hope that you have a great week of racing here on the Capital Off Track Betting Network. Have a great, great day. Bobby, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Get 4-1 for life.
Thank you.
Can't make it to the track or your local OTB branch? Then sign up for a Phonabet account with Capital OTB and join thousands of current account holders. Capital OTB operates one of the most successful Phonabet systems anywhere. Bet on Saratoga, Del Mar, and Churchill Downs from the comfort of your own home. All the tracks right at your fingertips. To open your account, simply call 1-800-292-BET. Capital offers 3 wagering options for convenience. For a live operator, call 1-800-342-4287. For our automated system, touch tone and voice recognition, call 1-800-233-0375. You can also sign up through Capital's website at www.capitalotb.com. Local phone numbers are available as well. Join and receive special promotions.